Hello, everybody. Welcome to another Hot Wash video. My name is Nate Winters, and I'm going to be talking about a ketogenic diet effect on Alzheimer's disease. So, in the world today, I'd say in the last 20 years, it's been pretty apparent that Alzheimer's is becoming a big deal. A lot of older people are suffering from it, and it's been termed as type 3 diabetes recently because what happens in the brain, it prefers glucose as its energy source. And as the brain becomes resistant to insulin, which we'll talk about later, and isn't able to absorb glucose, a lot of the functions in the brain aren't able to work. So the brain suffers and it can be involved in Alzheimer's disease, the slowing of cognition in typically older people. But as I was talking about, glucose is the preferred energy of the brain. You have your nice carbs, nice donut. It's glucose is structure here. And then, as I mentioned, insulin resistance. So insulin is a hormone that's released by the pancreas that essentially sends a message to tissues, and in this case specifically the brain, to let glucose in to the organ or the cells, so then can metabolize glucose and get energy. In the brain, it really wants glucose. That's its most preferred source of energy. So what happens is when the brain is unable to access glucose because it is not responding to insulin, you're going to have problems where the brain's going to have to work on different materials to get energy. So as I talked about, when no glucose isn't available, the brain can switch to ketones. And here we have beta hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate. These are the two main ketone bodies that the brain is going to metabolize. Acetone is more of a byproduct that isn't used, but it is a ketone body. And because ketones are small, they're polar and they're hydrophilic, means they can get in the bloodstream and pass through the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain so the brain can metabolize them for energy. So ketones, they're typically derived from fatty foods. Here you have some cashews, you have coconut oil, you have salmon. All these foods are going to have a lot of unsaturated fats and saturated fats that the brain that will be metabolized into ketone bodies by the liver and then eventually get in the bloodstream where it can get to the brain. So essentially one of the big ways in which a ketone-based diet can help somebody with Alzheimer's is if glucose isn't having an effect on their brain, at least they can have some energy source to power the brain and to power all the functions that are needed to keep a healthy brain. The brain, when it has glucose, glucose can go through glycolysis, which can produce some more energy and some more electron carriers. When ketones are metabolized by the brain, they go straight into the citric acid cycle, meaning that they skip over glycolysis and they're going to miss out on some energy and some electron carriers that can be used for energy later. So not as effective, but it's better to have some energy than no energy at all. So there's a few things I was looking at that show ways in which a ketogenic diet can help out people with Alzheimer's. So one of the problems with Alzheimer's patients is they have decreased mitochondrial function and decreased mitochondrial numbers in general. So there's a study where they fed rats who they purposely gave mitochondrial defects using mRNAs and different methods. They're able to essentially damage the mitochondria in these rats and feed them strictly ketogenic diets. And they saw that mitochondrial output and mitochondrial function increased in a lot of instances in these rats. So this is a very exciting field that ketogenesis can, or a ketogenic diet can possibly help out the mitochondria in the brains of patients who are suffering. Ketone bodies also have been shown to have anti-inflammatory properties. For example, beta hydroxybutyrate. So beta hydroxybutyrate has, in a study, has reduced the amount of reactive oxygen species. It activates erythroid-derived T-related factor, or NERV2, to stimulate antioxidant activity. So cells a lot of times intrinsically have antioxidant properties, meaning that they can go and take care of free radicals that are very reactive and can cause lots of unfavorable reactions in the brain and in cellular components. So beta hydroxybutyrate and specifically has been known to activate, or has been seen to activate this NERV2 factor, so the brain can ramp up its antioxidant activity to take care of that the reactive oxygen species that are causing problems in the brain. Also, beta hydroxybutyrate has been seen to inhibit a protein that activates B cells, NFKB. So when B cells are overactivated in the brain, it's going to cause an immune response, which is going to cause that inflammation, where the brain is going to essentially attack itself more than it should. The B cells being a part of that immune system to take care of pathologies in the brain. So when this is out of control, obviously the brain is going to be inflamed, and that happens a lot of times in patients with Alzheimer's. So ketone bodies activating a protein that inhibits such cells is going to be very big in helping reduce the inflammation in these patients and possibly slowing the progression of this really devastating disease. And lastly, there's not a ton of data to really show the mechanisms of how uh, this works. But ketones potentially can reduce amyloid plaques in the brain. So one of the things that happens, if you see here in the brain of an Alzheimer's patient, you have these amyloid plaques, or these essentially these proteins that have been cut up that are no longer useful, that are wasteful, but they're accumulating in the brain. And then these, when they accumulate on neurons, they can slow down the transmission of neural signals. For example, they can get close to the axon and inhibit a lot of that function. So people have cognitive decay, and their neurological wiring isn't really firing on all cylinders like it used to. So not a ton of data on how this is working, but a very potential uh, benefit of a ketogenic diet is ketone bodies can get in the brain and actually help clear some of these plaques, which would help slow the disease of patients and possibly even help cure if it was able to do it to a strong enough degree of getting rid of these plaques. But thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you learned something. Alzheimer's, it's very devastating, but it is reassuring to know that a ketogenic diet could possibly help out with some of these complicated issues. But thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a good night.